So somehow it's the last day of April, which I cannot believe. So we're going to do another restorative practice today. And kind of the focus of this week and restorative practice in general is to get the brain and the body to come together. Oftentimes the brain is doing one thing, the body is doing another. And so we can use the brain and the body and as tools for each other to keep both occupied. And then we have integration, and then we have absorption, and then we have presence. So no small task, but we'll use the restorative poses to help us keep the brain interested enough in what we're doing, but not overly so that we are stressing ourselves out. So we're gonna do our best to keep the brain occupied and the body active enough that we are feeling that sense of wholeness, which is really the goal of yoga, to feel unified and whole within ourselves. So let's just start with centering and taking any adjustments you need to create enough support that you really can let your body become more passive. You're not gripping in the groins, you're not holding your own leg weight up, and you're feeling a sense of connection with the floor. And all of that should then show up as lightness and alignment in the torso and the spine, sense of spaciousness. The breath might feel a little bit more, breath capacity might increase. And then once you feel like you have the seated position, bring your hands together in front of your heart. Close your eyes and look away from the brain. And just imagine your brain cells starting to settle. We've all kind of done some sort of experiment with a glass jar full of water and rocks and sand and sediment, shaken it up, and then watched it settle. And just imagine your own brain starting very kind of shooken. And as you just start to pay attention to yourself, to your breath, to your body, to your thoughts, you might start to sense some settling. You might imagine the image of that past experience of shaking a jar of liquid and rocks and sediment. And maybe here inviting a sort of wish or intention or resolve into your heart, maybe for this practice, maybe for yourself, for this day, for another. And do your best to keep your chest lifted as you bow towards your heart. Let your hands move down to your thighs, and on an in-breath, raise your head. Let your eyes gently open. And welcome. All right, we're going to come into a head-supported downward facing dog. So you'll want to build up some height so that your head reaches the height without having to bend your elbows, without having to distort the pose a lot. That being said, feel free to take the hands out beyond the shoulder line. That is not really a distortion of the pose. Actually, classically, the pose was a lot longer than we do it in most of our classes. But we definitely don't want to bend the elbows to meet the height of the prop. So you might just build up extra height until you kind of understand what you're able to work with. And then taking maybe a practice dog just to see if you have the right setup. And make sure that when you ground your head, your nose is not being smushed into your props, that you're able to breathe. And we're going to do our best to keep the crown of the head in contact with the props. You can envision the back of the neck is nice and long. And we want to feel that the head can kind of move through the props, that it's not kind of jamming up. So I just reduced my height because it was really jammed up. You want to feel like you can extend through the crown of the head. Try to move the shoulders toward the hips, away from the wrists. Try to lift your hips away from your wrists, as if someone's grabbing the hips and drawing them gently away from the wrists. And don't be aggressive with your legs. Let the heels descend as you elongate the upper body. You're kind of giving that length and letting it flow down the backside from the waist all the way down to the heels. And if you have enough going on as far as sensation in the body, the brain will be interested in that, and it will be occupied and it will be present. So use the amount of attention you're able to pay to the pose as a clue as to if what you're doing is enough or too much or just right. We're going to hold a little bit longer, but if you need to come out early, we're going to move into child's pose from here. So that would be where you would go into. Think about the backs of the knees opening. Think about your inner knees gently rolling back. Think about the outer knees gently pressing in. Think about the bottoms of the feet yawning open, the toes extending forward, the heels extending down. Just kind of moving your attention throughout the entire inner body. Try to keep the armpits awake and alive by lifting the hips away from the wrists. We don't want to end up with congested armpits. And keep the belly button somewhat anchored to the spine. Watch your breath. And now gently moving into child's pose. Take a wide enough distance between the knees that you're able to lower the torso close to the floor. Try to take your hips as close to the heels as they go. You might use your prop for your down dog. You might use that for supporting the chest. You might use it to support the head or the cheek. You might feel better just going straight down to the floor. So really finding your own child's pose here. And with every exhale, just giving the lower back a chance to move away from the skull. Noticing where there's still resistance in this fairly passive pose. There might still be some leftover residual effort. Just taking breath by breath to become more surrendered here. We'll be here another half a minute. We're going to start to move into a lateral pose for the spine. So whatever you have as far as soft props, like a blanket or a bolster, we're going to work with it to the right side body. So it's going to be running with the right side body so that you're able to lie down on kind of the narrow edge of it to the side ribs. And then you can unfold your bottom arm so your palm is up. You can rest your head against your bottom arm. You may extend your legs. You might keep your knees bent if you feel a little wobbly here. And if you visualize your spine, you're creating a little bit of a peak with the spine. And then you can take your top arm and bring your top arm and bottom arm together. The hands won't meet up perfectly. And the spine will be maybe a little resistant at first, but then you might start to sense that you're softening into the shape of the pose. You're not resisting it as much anymore. And bone, even though we think about it as really, firm and strong, it's very supple. You can actually correct scoliosis. I mean, if it's not super severe, with some balancing corrections such as this. Just thinking about your skeleton in a supple way, in a flexible way, letting go of that rigidity we might associate with the bones. And then letting breath kind of bring a little bit of aliveness into this somewhat static pose. Using the body to keep the brain interested. Making sure there's enough going on to occupy your mind. And then, of course, the body loves the attention of the brain. And then we're going to just transition. And as you transition throughout the class today, just be very aware that you're starting to cultivate some inner quietude that we want to carry through pranayama and shavasana. So just try to transition in the least disturbing way that you can to the brain, to the body. So that soft prop should be running kind of directly under the line of the armpit and probably not a lot lower than the bottom rib. So if you're using blankets, you might have to adjust the dimension to get that. You stack the top arm on top of the bottom arm when you're ready. And then just observe how the body doesn't quite settle all at once. We have some built-in kind of safety measures in the body of resistance. When we were little, we would get hurt all the time. We didn't have those safety measures. And now that we're grown, we have a lot of safety measures kind of built into us. Don't always need to be there. So just letting those fall away breath by breath as you soften into the shape. As the bone starts to respond. About 5 more breaths. It's kind of like a shepherding of the brain. You have to keep track of that brain. It likes to slip away. Bringing it back to the here and now, the sensate experience that you're providing with your body. Wonderful. Now we're going to take the top arm and just start to bring it back down and help ourselves transition once again. We're going to come into a series of seated poses, seated forward bends. And so you'll want to have a chair so that you can rest your head. And you'll want to have a blanket to sit on. And you'll want to have an additional blanket for hip support. So the chair is going to go in front of you. And we're going to start in bound angle pose. So you'll want to sit up on enough blanket height that you are tilting forward and you're on top of your sitting bones. So you should be right at the edge of the blanket. And then the bottoms of the feet will come together. Depending on your chair, you might also put something soft like a blanket over the chair so that you're not uncomfortable with the surface that your head or hands rest on. But first, just finding bound angle, sitting upright before we fold forward. So the feet will come together. The outer edges are together. The inner edges split open like a book. And you're going to hold your ankles or shins with your hands, which helps you bring your weight onto your sitting bones, helps you roll the shoulders back, helps you anchor into your legs. As you pull up on the ankles and shins, you can press the knees toward the floor. And then try to keep your chest as forward as you can. You're going to come forward and create a little surface for your head. So that might mean you're adding a block if that chair is too far away from your head. You might use your fists and stack them. You just want to find that first edge where there's enough going on in the body to keep the brain there. We're not overwhelmed, we're not bored. As you hold the pose, just notice some of those resistances that show up initially might start to fall away. They might start to dissolve, and they might not. We're not looking for certain answers, we're just looking. Notice how your breath shows up in this pose. As you go deeper, you might lower your head, you might push the chair farther forward. Just about 5 more breaths here. Let your head come up first. Try to come up on an in-breath. We're going to be unfolding the left leg 45 degrees. We'll come into Janu Shirshasana next with the chair. So you can extend the left leg, and then you can invite the right heel in closer to the upper inner thigh of the right leg. You might need to prop your right knee, and you're going to transfer your chair so it's right on top of your left leg. And then just using your fingertips to help you turn your torso as well as you can to face that left leg and chair. Take an inhale here, and then exhale again. You're going to find the perfect starting place for beginning your Janu Shirshasana, your head to knee pose. And remember, this pose, we keep a lot of attention in the side we're not facing. So in this case, the right side. You might not be in your most active, precise Janu Shirshasana. So again, it's just the idea that there's enough there to occupy the brain. And if you move through enough of the resistances and you start to elongate, pay attention that you might need to adjust your pose to a deeper position. You keep tracking that edge, which is a moving target. Maybe there's some really stuck area talking to you. Just bring it some attention, bring it some breath. You're going to start to lift your head again to come up and unfold your right leg. We're going to move through Upavishta Konasana. So I do find it helpful to turn and sit on a blanket corner for this pose. It's a little bit more supportive than the edge. And the corner is just under the tailbone. So the sitting bones shouldn't be propped. The chair comes to the center again. And you'll want to start just kind of encouraging the chest to lift and spread. So take your hands behind you, tenting up on those fingertips, anchoring into your legs and helping the shoulder blades into the chest, coming into the top of an in-breath, and then exhale forward and create whatever setup you need to connect your forehead. You might also add a block if the chair isn't high enough with what you're using. So the yoga mat is really a laboratory. We can kind of study our habits up close. And one of those habits we all have hardwired is how we meet resistance. And so here we have a physical experience of how we meet resistance. You might freeze, you might back off, you might stay. So it's helpful to kind of learn about ourselves. All the poses teach us about our habits. We'll be here another minute. Notice where your attention is kind of pooling. That could be a clue. Something might need to adjust or shift or change. Attention should be global throughout the body. So if it's kind of stuck in one area, you might need to support that area somehow or modify your pose. And you're going to come out of the pose again. Lift your head, come out on the in-breath. Find a gentle way to transition your blanket back to that long edge. And we'll be folding in our left leg now. You can bring the heel in nice and close by kind of moving the inner thigh flesh up and out of the way. You can also roll the calf muscle the opposite direction out of the way. You might get a closer connection of the heel to the upper inner thigh. And make sure to support there if you see your knees floating. And the chair will sit on top of the right leg. Starting with your torso upright, just using your fingertips against the floor to help you rotate the trunk as much to the right as you can. Lining your breastbone up with your right leg. Come to an inhale and then exhale, taking that first edge, grounding the forehead. That's important to get the nervous system quiet enough to really tolerate what you're doing. About 5 more breaths. Begin to come up slowly. I'm going to have you guys find a block, and when you fold in your right foot, you can stack your foot right in center in front of the left shin on the block, and you might feel or sense that you don't need to elevate the foot. Your knee will tell you. If your knee is feeling this, that's a sign that the hip is not ready, and we don't want the knee to take on rotation just because the hip won't. So you'll put the foot lower if the block is not necessary for you. The chair is going to come back to center. So I always like to do a little hip work on restorative week because the classical seated meditation pranayama pose is full lotus pose, which is a very deep hip opener. And so I just like to do a little bit of that on restorative week. So we're going to sit forward again, try to lift and spread your chest. Inhale. and then exhale, and you're going to attempt to once again ground your forehead. And you might notice right away that something needs to change, and of course change it. You might also notice that it's just something you're going to sit through and breathe through, and that there's just a lot of resistance at first, and it's not pain and it's not misalignment. This is how we become really adept in our practice. We discern if something is wrong or if something is just a challenge. Keeping a sense of weightedness in your sitting bones so that we don't just have momentum forward, we feel anchored to the floor. Try to envision your femur head really sinking in deep to the hip socket. Remember that restorative practice is less about stretching muscle, more about bone and joint and organ. See if you can invite the internal organs to soften here. And for most of us, we have a lot of congestion in the hips. So taking a few breaths, maybe imagining your breath swirling around like a little dust devil in the hip socket. Maybe imagining spaciousness, light. Exhaling through those resistances built into the body. On an inhale, start to come off the head support. And you're going to just simply transition so that left foot is now going to be forward and elevated maybe. And right foot is on the ground again and behind left. And it might be a totally different or somewhat different experience. So just acknowledging if this is right. Take a moment to sit up, lift and spread the chest. Inhale. And then exhale, finding a way to prop your head. Right now, we're putting good stress on the joint, hip joint. Just 5 more breaths. go ahead and lift your head, slowly inhale, come up. You can take the block out of the way. You're gonna put both legs under the chair. If you have this little crossbar in the back of the chair, it can be a nice place to put your toes to keep your toes above your heels, but it's definitely not necessary. So first, just sitting in Dandasana and just kind of sealing your legs as best you can to the floor, finding the lift and spread of your chest, finding your sitting bones, taking an inhale, and then exhale, Paschimottanasana, so the Western facing forward bend, resting the head again. Noticing how forward bends deep like this one support an extension of your exhalation. You can really follow that breath out pretty far. And you might also notice your inhale is a little bit shorter, maybe more passive. Maybe noticing the breath spreading, feathering out between the back ribs as your front body becomes more and more compressed. Just another half a minute here. And we're going to start to inhale up. And we can put the chair aside. We're done with the chair. We are going to come into a series of reclining poses now. So just make sure things are within reach. Your blankets and your strap. And because we just did so many forward bends, let's do a supported bridge pose, just to kind of come back to a neutral place. So taking your block and placing it either the low or the medium setting across the sacrum, underneath the sacrum. And you can just have your shins kind of more upright. You don't have to have the feet as close to your sitting bones as possible. You can also take a little bit of a wider stance with your feet, but don't turn your toes out. So just make sure your toes are in line with your heels. And then rest on the backs of your hands so that your shoulders can sink down to the floor. And rock your head so that your chin tilts toward your chest. Letting the block do that heavy lifting of taking the tailbone into the body toward the ceiling. Noticing a fuller in-breath here. Noticing maybe some relief in your back. And then make sure to check in to see if you have completely surrendered or maybe there's still some resistance. Maybe the back isn't meeting the block as much as it could be. Maybe some part of the body is still trying to hold itself up. We're going to start to transition, so you want to use the power of your legs and lift your hips to help you get the block out. And then find your strap. We're going to make a loop with the strap that's going to go around the wrists. The wrists are going to be as wide as the shoulders. We're going to come into Tadasana, but reclining Tadasana. So your strap should fit your wrist in a way that that distance is equal to the distance spread of the shoulders. And then you'll extend your legs and take the arms overhead. Your legs can be hip distance, but make sure to activate your legs and put the toes above the heels. So the strap is there to contain your arms, and it should help you really get the breadth of the shoulders kind of maximized. And keep the shoulders down, keep the shoulders anchored into the trunk. We don't want any unnecessary gripping or tension here. We just want to really kind of feel the floor lining us up really perfectly. Try to minimize that big gap between your back and the floor. Try to minimize the spaces behind the knees, behind the ankles. So holding yourself pretty actively and attentively, just for a few more breaths. If you were floating above your body, you'd see your kneecaps looking straight up to the ceiling. Now go ahead and soften everything. You can come out of the strap. And you're going to take a blanket and just maybe fold it once. We're going to take the tree pose shape with the left knee being the bent knee side. And I want you to prop underneath your left hip any amount you need to so that your hips are level. Because if we did it without the blanket, you would fall to the left. So I want you to prop underneath the left hip. Take the left foot alongside any part of your right leg, even over the knee here, since we're not weight bearing is fine. Just taking the general tree pose shape and then extending the arms overhead, bringing the hands to prayer and doing your best to fully extend your arms, meaning no bent elbows. Tilt your chin into your chest. And again, try to decrease the gap between the back and the floor. Even though you're propping that left hip, you want to bring the left knee toward the floor. And I just want you to feel the full expression of this pose, but without the stress of weight bearing and balancing. And if you can kind of sense the whole body at once, the pose is perfect. these more active poses, we're not going to hold as long, so you can go ahead and start to gently set up to second side. Propping the right hip side enough that you're able to feel the hip points are level, and you're still able to press that right knee toward the floor. The left leg is active as if you were standing, and then the arms are above the head, hands pressing together in the Urdhva Namaskarasana, so the upward prayer pose. Chin toward chest, armpits open, soft, steady gaze, straight up to the ceiling. And just a few breaths. Your full attention. And go ahead and soften out. You can keep your blanket underneath your right hip side, but you can unfold it and just have it running alongside the hip. We're going to come into hand to big toe pose. And you're going to want to prop your right foot, which will be out to the right side soon. So you might use a block, you might use a bolster, you might use a blanket. Whatever you're going to need to rest the foot or even the leg. It doesn't have to be your foot. There's lots of wiggle room here. And just to kind of work with less, you can take the loop you had and just cinch it down until it's the size of your foot that you can hold your foot with. And I want you to really keep your right elbow down on the floor on the blanket. And wrap your hand if you need to. And move your right leg out to the side and find that resting position for your right foot. Extending the left arm sideways, palm up. Breathing into the right inner thigh. Feeling that gentle work of rotating the torso from right to left. Keeping the left leg firmly on the floor. And now we're going to slowly move the leg to center. You can step the foot down once you take the strap away. You'll switch your blanket and whatever's propping your foot to the left. And take hold of the left foot with that loop. Bringing the left elbow to the floor, extending the right leg, and slowly moving left leg to your prop. Unfold the right arm to the side. And hopefully you have enough support that the pose feels pretty passive. Still some work going on, some effort in the right leg, some work in the rotation of the trunk. And we're going to start to gently move the leg back to center. You can take the strap away. We're going to come into a twist with all the props kind of moved out of the way. So take your arms and just spread them out wide. Your palms are down. And then lift your feet from the floor one at a time. We're not going to cross the legs today. We're just going to move the legs together. We'll start by moving them to the left. So on your exhale, just start to move your legs to the left. You'll take your left hand onto your right knee, and you might prefer to have your right hand kind of draping over the side ribs, or you could keep the arm extended. If your legs shift as they kind of settle and arrive, let them shift. You don't want to be gripping in the legs. Remember that will kind of inhibit the spine from twisting. So let your legs just kind of soften once you get them over to the side and you're holding them with your hand. And you might turn your head to the right. You might just keep the head facing the ceiling, but either way, maybe close the eyes. And then you can release the hold of your leg, and you'll just kind of pull your legs one at a time to center. And when you get to center, just take a moment to grab your legs and take a reclining child's pose, hugging the legs toward the chest, but tilting the chin toward the chest. And then spread the arms in each direction again. And on an exhale, let both legs move together to the right. Let them arrive and kind of fall to the floor. And use your right hand to help them settle into place. So just kind of give them the support of your hand holding them. Placing your left hand either against your side ribs or keeping it out to the side. You might turn the palm up here. And gazing up or over to the left. Five breaths. And after an exhale, help your legs one at a time back to center. And then grab the shins, separate the knees. Breathing into the groins, softening the abdomen. Letting the hips have a nice chance to open. And then you can step your feet to the floor. We're going to be setting up for pranayama. If you were here Monday, we worked on Ujjayi pranayama. With the exhale, we're just going to add to that. So the opportunity to also add the viloma, which means interrupted, or it actually translates as against the hair, but it's interrupting the exhale. And if you felt like the Ujjayi exhale was enough for you, you might just continue with that and not introduce the interruptions today. We always have to just really be sensitive in pranayama in our practice and in pranayama. So you're going to set up that kind of tiered setup where you have the floor, first layer blanket, second layer blanket, and then enough of a pillow support for the head to tilt toward the chest. You want to make sure that you're warm enough. If your eyes have trouble closing, you might take an eye pillow or put your strap over your eyes. You might remove your glasses if you're wearing glasses. And we want that setup to really meet us so that the chest is lifted and the chin and chest are meeting. The buttocks is pulled away from the end of that setup. The lumbar is spacious and long. And the arms are opened in a way that the armpits can aerate. There's no compression of the arms against the trunk. And you're just going to settle into breath observation at first. You're not trying to condition your breath in any way. You're just getting a baseline. You're going to kind of self-guide. So when you're feeling ready to start with, we're just going to start with Ujjayi exhale before we interrupt it. So when you're feeling ready, you'll just start with a complete normal inhale, exhale, and another normal inhale. And then empty that one Ujjayi exhale, slow release of the breath, steady, without hardening the belly, without inviting agitation or tension. You might be able to do every exhale. You might have to separate those Ujjayi out breaths with a few normal breath cycles. And you don't get to decide, you really have to sense. The idea is to keep the brain really undisturbed, to get quieter here, not louder, to get calmer here, not more riled up or agitated. So Ujjayi exhale is already down regulating to the nervous system. When we interrupt it, it gets even more so. So it's even more down regulating to the nervous system. So if you're going to try those interruptions, I recommend 3 segments of breath, which means 2 interruptions. And it's just a short beat of pausing before you release the next segment, pause, and then the final segment out. Easy inhale, easy out breath, easy inhale. So again, I'm just going to have you self-guide. You might be just Ujjayi exhaling. You might be trying some interruptions. Hopefully everybody is doing the needful. Their bodies, their minds, their nervous systems. As you start to develop this practice, you might start to work with more interruptions. And wherever you are with it, just coming back to easy breath cycles. Just observing those breaths come and go without any effort on your part. Finding a way to move off of your pranayama supports. And just taking a few moments lying down in Shavasana, as passive as can be, mentally, physically. Also with the breath, you don't want to be working with the breath at this point. You're just passive. You're witnessing, you're sensing the residuals of all that you've just done in the last hour. And you might sense now that the brain and the body are more integrated and it's not as effortful. Your brain is staying more present now without so much effort. Let's take a deep breath in. Just let it fully empty. Wiggling the fingers and toes, folding the hands onto the belly, bending the knees, shifting to your side, and helping yourself come up. Once you're seated, just taking a couple moments to sit quietly, either hands somewhere on your lap or your legs, or hands meeting in front of the heart. And we'll bring our hands together now. Let's take a deep in-breath together through the nose and let it go. From the place within me that I know to be divine, I honor that place within each of you. Namaste. Great. So glad to see you all this morning. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and look forward to seeing you next week, hopefully. Take care.